Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Carr, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Movement as Medicine: How Music, Movement, and Dance Transform the Neurodivergent Brain. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Julia Basso. Dr. Julia Basso is an assistant professor in the Department of Human Nutrition, Foods and Exercise at Virginia Tech, a scientific wellness consultant, and director of the Embodied Brain Laboratory. She also holds affiliate faculty positions in the Virginia Tech School of Neuroscience and is a fellow at both the Institute for Creativity, Arts and Technology and the Center for Health Behaviors Research at the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute at Virginia Tech Carilion. A Renee Fleming NeuroArts investigator, her research has been featured in prominent outlets such as the New York Times, Dance Magazine, Psychology Today, Virginia Living, and National Public Radio. In addition to her scientific work, she creates dance performances and artistic installations that visualize and sonify brain activity, extending her commitment to understanding and sharing the embodied mind through both research and art. To learn more, please visit www.embodiedbrainlab.com. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking these two poll questions to our live audience. Number one, how would you describe your comfort level with dance or moving to music? High, it is or was one of my favorite things to do. Moderate, I can be convinced to dance, but I won't volunteer. Or low, I feel uncomfortable dancing. Question number two, if you'd like to use dance or music-related movement to help manage symptoms for yourself or someone neurodivergent in your life, what's preventing you? I don't know how to integrate it into my routine. I don't have time. I'm not convinced it will really help. Embarrassment or mobility issues. Please provide your answers and comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you support the work that we're doing here at ADDitude, please subscribe to our quarterly print publication, ADDitude Magazine. ADDitude Magazine won a national award for our first ever women's issue, and we couldn't be more proud. Our winter issue, which just came out, includes a feature very appropriate for today's guest that delves into the science of music and how it lights up the ADHD brain. We are hard at work now on our spring issue, which includes a feature package on autism, including a spread of artwork by artists with autism. If you have art you'd like to submit for possible inclusion in the magazine, please send to submissions@additudemag.com. If you're not yet an ADDitude subscriber, visit additudemag.com/subscribe or click the Subscribe Now tab on your screen to learn more. Webinar participants will get 15% off your order, plus a free copy of the ebook, How the ADHD Brain Works. So, without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Julia Basso. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So I wanted to start talking about ADHD and ASD symptomatology. So when we think about these neurodevelopmental disorders, we see a few different symptoms or conditions. So for example, with ADHD, we see things like an inattentive kind of mind, impulsivity, forgetfulness, restlessness, often with the body, and time agnosia, not keeping track of time, being able to focus on time. And in ASD, we see things like social communication differences, sensory sensitivities, maybe focus on special interests, or struggles with sudden change. And when we look at the two disorders kind of overlapping, there's actually a lot of overlapping symptoms, like the ability to seek or avoid sensory input, maybe a focus and forgetfulness. And when we look at the statistics of this, we see about 40 to 50% of individuals with ASD meet the criteria for ADHD. And conversely, about 20 to 30% of individuals with ADHD meet criteria for ASD. One in particular symptom I would like to focus on is a developmental coordination disorder, which is often comorbid with ADHD and ASD. And it's the symptom of incoordination, the ability to not being able to coordinate between left and right sides of the body, for example, upper and lower parts of the body. It may manifest as struggling with bilateral coordination, or as delays in meeting motor milestones, or slower eligible handwriting, for example, and having perhaps frequent falls or trips, right? So there's this multitude of symptoms that present. And when we look at that, right, it's a cluster of symptoms that deal with both the mind and the body, mental and physical issues. And so we look towards mind-body movement practices as a potential solution for some of these things, because there's issues at both the level of the mind and the body. So mind-body movement practices, when I use that term as an example, things like yoga, meditation, dance, and exercise. Today, we're going to be focusing a lot on dance. And when we think about some of these practices and kind of why it's mind and body, well, there's a sensory motor experience to it for sure. So there's that aspect of engaging with the external world, engaging our exteroreceptors or our sensory receptors on the skin. But there's also an internal component where we're stimulating our interoceptors. We're noticing sensations in the body, like the heartbeat and the breath. And so it kind of combines this external and internal perspective. Now, when we think about current pharmacological treatments for ADHD and ASD, there are a variety of them. For example, stimulant medications, SSRIs or antidepressants, antipsychotics, antiepileptic drugs, and some other drugs that are utilized as well. And a lot of these drugs focus on particular symptoms. For example, anxiety and depression, irritability, aggression. And when we look at kind of the benefit to side effect ratio, there was a recent study that looked at 505 participants with ASD. And you can see the black bars here represent the benefits, and the black bars represent the side effects. So you see that the gray bars are kind of high throughout. There's definite benefit for a lot of these symptoms, but there's also some side effects. So, a lot of these medications are having side effects. And that is why we turn to alternative forms of treatment, like these mind-body movement practices I was mentioning earlier. And so why might we think about alternative treatments or adjunctive treatments? So for one, there tends to be limited efficacy with certain of these drugs. For example, stimulant medications are effective for about 70% of children with ADHD. And so, right, it leaves a percentage of the population that it's not working for. For ASD, when we talk about social communication symptoms, there's actually no medication for this core issue. And those medications that are available, they target particular symptoms: depression, anxiety, aggression, agitation, so on and so forth. There's also side effects, which include many of these things, both physical and mental. Things like headache, nausea, liver and kidney problems can emerge, as well as things like anxiety and depression. And then third, sometimes these medications are just not available. There's actually shortages, especially when we're thinking about Adderall, one of the primary stimulants prescribed for ADHD. There's shortages all over the world, all over the United States. And so it becomes an issue when the medication is not available. Another thing I would like to mention is when you're thinking about something like Adderall, right, it has this half-life, this time period that it works 6 to 8 hours, maybe 12 hours. And there's often this fade out period, especially around the end of the day for students, for children, kind of coming out of that work or school time. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and this is why we think about alternative treatments or adjunctive treatments to the current pharmacology. So I want to talk to you first about the neurodivergent brain. A lot of research has been done in this space, and it's still being done. Some of the things I want to highlight that have been found are that there's differences in neurotransmitter signaling. So things like, you may have heard about dopamine and serotonin, norepinephrine. So some of the neurochemicals that flood the brain, there's differences there. There's also differences in the excitation inhibition balance. So there are neurotransmitters that act as go signals and act as stop signals. So there's differences there. There have also been differences shown in functional connectivity, how the brain is itself connecting between different areas, as well as differences in the amygdala. The amygdala is part of our emotional center of the brain, and sensory motor and coordination areas like the striatum and the cerebellum in the back of our heads here. So many different differences or things in the brain have been found when comparing to neurotypical populations. And I would like to bring up this point now. So why movement? Well, movement works on all these exact same things. It increases and affects neurotransmitters. It produces growth of different brain areas, especially those brain areas that we were just talking about, like the cerebellum, like the striatum, prefrontal cortex. And it enhances the complexity of their neural circuits, increasing functional connectivity and helping to alter those same brain circuits that we were just talking about. And when we think about behavior, what ends up happening is that we see improvements in mood, decreases in stress, improvements in cognition, especially prefrontal cortex or the executive functions of the brain, which are often within ADHD, executive dysfunction is one of the symptoms. It improves learning and memory, it improves attention, helps with sleep, and helps with social connection, as I show you. So I love movement, and I love to talk about movement for this exact reason. It's a holistic practice. It affects so many different things. Now, if you remember, right, we were looking at SSRIs, for example, antidepressants. SSRI standing for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Selective serotonin, right? It works on one thing. It works on serotonin. It has affinity for some other things as well, but serotonin is the primary driver. Well, exercise works on so many different things: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, enhances new growth of neurons. So it does a multitude of things that a single drug, a single pill is not going to do. So it's pretty amazing. And when we think about dance and kind of jumping into the space of dance, we conducted a study, and this was during the COVID-19 experience. So we were all isolated in our homes, and we were experiencing loneliness and social isolation. Depression and anxiety skyrocketed. The increases in mental health issues were just really extreme. And so what we did was we created an online dance program. And it was just an hour of online dance. You were dancing in your own home through a Zoom screen. And what we found was that just an hour of dance decreased negative affect and depression and increased self-esteem and positive affect. It also increased social connectedness and community connectedness. And when we look at the relationship of those things, the more that individuals gained in self-esteem and the more that individuals decreased in their negative affect, the more they gained in their social connection. So this is really exciting, and I like to think about this as what I call the mind-body community connection. So you actually can utilize the body to improve what's going on in the mind, cognitively, mental health aspects, and then connect socially. So that's really kind of what we focus on, this idea of how can we use movement to improve socio-emotional health, social and emotional health. Okay, so now I'm going to take you into a little bit of the movement patterns. So these are neurodevelopmental patterns of movement. And, you know, if we had a whole, maybe 2 hours more, then I could take you into an actual full class, a full dance movement class. And certainly these patterns of connectivity, what are called the total patterns of body connectivity, can be brought into kind of that whole workshop series. I'm just going to give you a little flavor of them today. So Irmgard Bartinieff, who is over here on the left, she developed the Bartinieff fundamentals, these patterns, neurodevelopmental patterns of movement that then later Peggy Hackney turned into the total patterns of body connectivity. And Peggy Hackney, who was a student of Bartinieff's, said movement is a way of knowing in all life. Bartinieff fundamentals is a type of body training which encourages me to sense and feel what is fundamental in my own organism and what is fundamental about how I relate to the world. So this is this idea of the exteroception, how we're interacting with the world, how we're interacting with the internal self, that interoception, that dance and movement really tap into those two aspects that help us coordinate, that help us regulate our mood, and improve how we think and how we feel. So the first one is breath. And so for this, because I'm going to do a little movement, I'm going to take my jacket off just so you can see me moving. The first one is breath. And when we think about breath, and I'll just move my chair and kind of stand up here for you. So when we think about breath, breath is the first pattern of movement that comes on board. When we talk about these neurodevelopmental patterns, there's 3 ways to discuss them. 1 is evolutionarily, 2 is through human development, and 3rd is through dance, yoga, meditation, all these mind-body movement practices I'm talking about. It is essential for life. It comes on board within the first 10 seconds after birth. So breath is one of the best ways we can use to regulate ourselves. And when there are things like tantrum, agitation, anxiety, anything that's affecting what's called the sympathetic nervous system. And this tends to happen in individuals with ADHD and ASD. There's this hyperactivation or overactivation of our sympathetic nervous system, and that's our fight or flight system. So we can tap into breath. Breath is one of the only ways we have to tap into our parasympathetic nervous system. So we're going to just take a few moments to engage in slow, deep breathing. This is called the Durga breath, and it's a 3-part breath. So you're first going to breathe into belly, then chest, and ribs. And so you're going to breathe in through the nose, inhaling, belly, chest, ribs, and exhale through the nose, ribs, chest, belly, slowing down the breathing. Inhale, belly, chest, ribs, fill all the way up. Exhale, ribs, chest, and belly. Inhaling again, belly, chest, ribs. Exhaling, ribs, chest, and belly. And of course, you can continue on for as long as you like in these practices. There's many different kinds of breathing practices. A box breathing pattern is another, where you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4 again, and continue. And this kind of movement pattern, the breath, our first movement pattern, is an excellent way to stimulate parasympathetic nervous system or the rest and digest system. Okay. Second, we're moving into navel radiation. This is the second movement pattern, and it comes on board evolutionarily with our starfish. In neurodevelopment, it comes on board in the first few months of life with that Moro reflex when the baby startles. And in dance and movement, we can use it by coming into our core and coming out. And you can do this as slowly or as quickly as you like. It can even come into a jump if you like something more vigorous, or you can do it seated by just sitting in a chair, contracting in, expanding out, really expanding through the tips of the fingers, coming back in and out. Beautiful. And then continuing with that for some moments. Next up, we have spinal head and tail movement. And this comes on board evolutionarily with our fish ancestors, this spinal movement. And in babies, what ends up happening is that you can push up on the hands, the eyes become available, you're able to look around. And in movement practices, we can do a cat and cow. Again, this can be seated, but you're making a C shape with the spine from the side and curving in and back and curving in again. You can also do spinal lateral flexion movements, moving to the side. So working with the spine in front and back and lateral motion. The next one that comes on board is homolateral. So that's left and right sides of movement coming on board with our lizard ancestors. And this ability enables babies to crawl and move through the space. And in dance and movement, we can stretch left and right using the left and right sides of our body. And this helps with coordination as we start to grow those neurons from left to right sides of the brain. So it really helps. This is called the brain dance, working with movement to help create patterns of activity across the brain, which again, as I was saying, in the ADHD, ASD brain, sometimes there's differences in this cross connectivity. So the more we practice these neurodevelopment movement patterns, the more this functional connectivity kind of changes as we're doing this. Next, we have homologous. And homologous is upper-lower differentiation, comes on board with our frog ancestors, and it enables us to stand. And of course, here I'm doing a handstand, so that's one way to work it. But another way is reaching up and coming down, touching the toes, touching the knees, touching the shins, and rolling up and down. So anything that enables you to reach up to the sky and then down to the ground, you can reverse that, reaching up to the sky and then pouring down like a rainbow. Reaching up to the sky and coming down. Okay, and then finally, we have contralateral or diagonal. This is our most evolutionary pattern of movement and comes on board when we walk, when we stand, and when we move through time and space. And through dance, right, this is the ability to cross the midsection, the midline of our body. We can go into a little bit of a spinal twist here. Another way to do that is to, and this is a nice one too, you get a tap on the kidneys. Always breathe. Throughout all of these patterns of movement, you always want to bring your breath on board and release. So you can go through these neurodevelopmental patterns of movement to help you integrate across the body. And interestingly, when we think about the neurodevelopmental patterns of movement, and when you talk to some dance therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and physicians, they may use this ability of crossing the midline to act actually as a diagnosis for some of these neurodevelopmental issues. So by training them through dance and movement, we can potentially help improve symptomatology of these neurodevelopmental issues. So now, this is what I like to add into this space, right? Because I told you the Bartinia Fundamentals and Peggy Hackney's edition of the Total Patterns of Body Connectivity. I like to think about, because when we think about those, it's all within the individual. But we operate as human beings in social communication and in social contact with others. So when we think about movement, it's really happening in partnership. And it happens very, very early on in neurodevelopment. And so this is something called movement synchrony or neural synchrony, right? These two things, when we start acting in tandem through movement, we actually start to coordinate our neural oscillations. This is something called interbrain synchrony. And when I talk about neural oscillations, I'm talking about the patterns of brain activity. And you can see, right, here we have a mom smiling, connecting at the level of the eyes. Here, the dad. There might be some kind of mother-ese going on there, the communication through verbal language and gesturing. And when those kinds of things happen, the brains, the patterns of the brains, the rhythms of the brains between the caregiver and the child start to integrate. They start to kind of with that idea of when you're on the same brain wave or brain length as somebody, the neural patterns of the brain activity starts to become coordinated. And in dance, this is exactly what we do. So I'm going to show you a practice that you can think about doing with your own child, with your partner, whoever it is kind of you're interacting with, a practice called mirroring. And this comes out of the dance movement therapy space. And this is my dance partner, Rachel Rue. We're wearing an EEG head cap, recording our own brain activity while we're mirroring one another. And how we like to mirror, and you can just follow along with me on your screen. So I'm going to start moving, and you can move and follow me as closely as possible. So for example, and you can continue on these movement patterns. And the idea is that one person moves, the other person moves in coordination with the other as closely as possible, kind of thinking about facial expression, gesturing. So that's mirroring. Another kind of practice is a conversation in dance where one person can move and the other person answers them through movement in any way that they would like, a nonverbal communication. And this kind of communication, I think, is really important because when we think about ASD in particular, and even some with ADHD, some of these individuals are nonverbal. And so utilizing a nonverbal form of communication may be particularly helpful to help with social coordination. Okay, so I talked about a little bit about the brain, rhythms of the brain. And when we think about the brain, and you saw the slide right where we had our head recorded, our brain activity recorded, there's all different kinds of rhythms of the brain. The brain operates in these different rhythm patterns from all the way from very slow delta waves, or 1 to 4 times per second happening during sleep primarily, all the way through gamma, which is our really kind of fast, active brain, problem-solving brain when we're at focused and concentrated. And so when we think about these states, there's this alpha state in particular, the theta and alpha state, that we're very interested in. So when you tend to be anxious and really that heightened awareness in that fight or flight mode I was talking about, sympathetic activation, there tends to be heightened beta activity. The brain waves are operating very quickly. And so some of these mindfulness meditation practices helps to calm down the brain, get us into more of that alpha state, the 8 to 12 hertz oscillation. And so we're very interested in this in the lab, and how movement practices can help us regulate, to help us calm down, and what does the brain look like in movement. When we think about coordinating between two brains, we have this idea of the social brain. And so that brains operate collectively. And I would like you to think about this idea of co-regulation. And so these movement practices I was showing you, for example, movement mirroring, they help to co-regulate and coordinate brain activity actually between two individuals to help us understand one another more deeply. That's really what these neural signals getting more similar, that's what they help to do. Essentially, that's their function. And in what's called interbrain synchrony has been shown to occur in things like problem-solving tasks, joint drawing, math tasks, any kind of cooperative kind of interaction, cooperative gameplay. And of course, we've been doing it in dance and movement, and also kind of music and music production as well. And when we think about this and why dance might be so important, I put forth the synchronicity hypothesis of dance. And dance, it's this multimodal form of physical activity. It not only has the sensory motor components, like a lot of things like running, bicycling, kind of your traditional aerobic exercises, it has a cognitive component, right? So often we're engaged in choreography, we're learning and remembering information. There is a rhythmic component. You're often in training to rhythms of music, and I can talk about that in the question and answer session if you'd like. There's a creative aspect. We're often creating movements anew. We are kind of generating new and exciting movements. And then there's certainly a social and emotional component to it. You often tend to do dance in a group. And there's this emotional component, especially while watching dance and participating in it by yourself. And when you think about a practice that brings all of these things together, you can imagine that the neural oscillations between those areas need to coordinate and connect: the social and emotional centers, the sensory and motor centers, the cognitive and creative centers. And so you have this thing that's called intrabrain synchrony, or the functional connectivity of the brain coordinating. And then when you have multiple dancers coordinating, there's the interbrain synchrony, or the coordination of all of these people coming together as they move. So this is really kind of the hypothesis that we're exploring, why dance may be so helpful for social coordination, social synchrony, and to help regulate and self-regulation and kind of co-regulation. Okay, so putting it into practice, I wanted to show you some results of a current study that we did. And we did this study with a group called STEP VA. They're over in Fredericksburg, VA. They're a fantastic group of individuals and a community. Their kind of motto is, we empower people with disabilities and their families through creative expression and sensory exploration. And what they did, and they do every year, is they put on a musical production. we had the privilege of joining them for Charlie Brown, the musical. And what we did was, before and after the whole experience, the musical theater intervention, as it were, we asked a variety of questions of both the participants and their parents, and we recorded their brain activity. I do have a little video of that I want to show you in a minute. So we had a group of 16 wonderful individuals who participated in this. They sung, they danced, they acted, and we do have a video that we can play for you. And if we go ahead and play the video, I think that would be great. All right. Fantastic. So I wanted you to see a little bit of what we're exactly doing, right? We're recording the brain activity while these individuals danced and sung and performed one of the musical pieces of Charlie Brown, the musical. And so what does this do to the brain? What does this do to behavior? How do these kinds of dance, music, movement practices impact the brain? And this was a group in particular of a range of a variety of different disabilities, primarily autism spectrum disorder. And what we found was this. So the dance, music, theater intervention, here we have on the left-hand side the participants themselves. And we also asked the parents, as I said. So parents are on the right, participants are on the left. In terms of freedom from anxiety, so feeling free from anxiety, we saw a significant improvement or increase in their freedom from anxiety. We also found a decrease in separation anxiety and an additional significant decrease in social phobia. So they were feeling less anxious, more able to go out and be social, and of course perform and engage with their community that they were showing the wonderful performance to. So by participating in this musical theater program, and it was 8 weeks, an 8-week long training program that they did, basically a semester-long musical theater program. It had many different impacts at both mental and social health. And then subsequently at the level of the brain, so this was during a resting baseline brain state, just kind of your normal resting brain state, versus when they're engaged in their musical theater program. And what you're seeing here, the red lines indicate that connectivity, that neural connectivity between the individuals. And the red lines indicate more connectivity. And we see that just from your normal resting state to when they're engaged in these practices, we see increases in a variety of different waveforms, especially in alpha and beta. And so these individuals are connecting with one another, which, interbrain synchrony is kind of this underlying, it's thought to be kind of an underlying neural mechanism of social connection. When we look to kind of the overall impact of the musical theater program, some of the participants were saying, we use imagination and you believe in yourself. Awesome. I never felt better. I loved it. It was amazing. It made me feel very happy. I love my Step Virginia friends. They are my favorite friends. So you're hearing echoes of all of those, the mental health improvements and the social improvements. Parents said, my child loves Step VA and the people there. He appears to be so comfortable with everybody. My child loves Step Virginia. It has created friendships and a chance to do the things he loves, singing, dancing, and acting. He loves Step VA, and it's helped his self-esteem and overall daily life. Another one to point out is that seeing your child with special needs, having fun, hanging out with their friends, and doing something they love always warms a mom's heart. Where my child has a purpose in life and feels fulfilled, it helps our whole family dynamic. So it was, of course, it was helping the participants themselves, but also the family and at home. And that's because if you have a situation of mind-body movement practice that is helping the child to self-regulate, then the whole household is going to be more regulated. And so I think that's an important point to note. Okay, so I know we got a lot of questions, and we're going to have some time for more live questions. But things I wanted to note from reading some of those questions, this idea of movement is medicine. It might even be better than just taking a simple pill that does one thing, right? Movement does this myriad of things, even in small doses, 10 minutes at a time, for example. You can get involved by joining your local music or dance studio, yoga studios, theater programs. We have a wonderful one in town led by Professor Rachel Rue. Her motto is holistic dance education for everybody. So, of course, if you're lucky enough to have a program like that in your local community, seek it out. Of course, if you don't want to go out of your home or things like that, then, there's online videos and apps. We have started a movement series at Embodied Brain Lab on our Instagram, so you can check that out if you're interested. And then, I wanted to thank you for those previous questions. You were talking about things like accessible entry points. It might be hard to get motivated to do these things. So, of course, chair-based practices are excellent to start with. You don't have to get up on a dance floor and do these big movements. Small gestural, kind of daily rhythmic gestures, even just going for walking, a mindful walk, meditating or breathing as you walk. And it can be done in short, frequent bouts. I like to talk about this to some of my students in that, the breathing practice can be really instrumental, because especially if you're in a social situation or somewhere where it's not appropriate to, go out in the middle of the dance floor and do some of your patterns of movement, you can just use breath quietly and in your seat to self-regulate. If you lack motivation, I love this kind of idea of partnering some of these movement practices with something that you love, favorite music, favorite show, just to kind of start getting that associative learning connection piece. You really want to try to get if you're in that parasympathetic state where you don't want to get off the couch or the bed, and you need to get the sympathetic nervous system a little bit in gear. And so there's particular ways to do that. Listening to music is one of them. Getting up and getting a glass of water. There's kind of little tips and tricks to help that. And for teachers, who are asking some questions, kind of this idea of clear visual cues and consistent structure, positive reinforcement and non-judgmental language, all of this should be fun. It should be fun and playful. And often when I talk about improvisation, it's play. We're playing together, we're moving together, and we're having fun. Okay. And then I wanted to, for those of you who want some more of these, we got to do like a little bit, but this book is wonderful for describing some of those movement practices and extrapolating on those movement practices I was sharing with you. Brain Compatible Dance Education gets into all of those neurodevelopmental patterns of movement for children, adolescents, and adults. It kind of scaffolds up through the ages. And if you wanted to learn more, I do have a recent documentary out that mostly focuses on music, DJing, dancing, but it does talk about the science of all of this in a more expansive way. I would like to acknowledge all of these folks, and especially ADDitude, and all of you for joining. And I think we will open it up to questions.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. That was such an illuminating presentation. And thank you for your patience as we work through the tech issues. Some of our participants are telling me that Mercury is in retrograde today. So I think, guess
I always hear that.
But I will say that having an opportunity to do some breath work with you and get up and move certainly helps to regulate my nervous system. So thank you so much for that. Before we get to a lot of wonderful questions, I just wanted to read a few comments that participants have shared here today about their experience with dance and movement to music. One says, I've been doing a group dance class for a couple of years that has helped me tremendously. And I've noticed that many of the women in the class are also neurodivergent. Another says, I actually teach a ballroom and Latin dance class to 9th graders. My students with ADHD and ASD frequently exclaim with surprise when they do well and enjoy it, but wait, I'm not supposed to be good at this. reader even wrote in to tell us that movement works as a nervous system regulation tool for her child with a trauma history, and that after the trauma in question, she noticed that her daughter was using dance before bed as a way to calm down before rest and get some of that energy out of her body, she presumed. So definitely with our participants here today, many are echoing what your wonderful slides and research is showing us, which is that it can be so incredibly therapeutic. So yes, we have a lot of questions. A question that came up is one style or genre of dance better than another for unlocking some of these benefits?
Sure. So the research is showing really that, it's still being explored, right? But the research is showing that the program that is best for you is the one that brings you most joy, the one that you're enjoying. So my daughter, for example, has ADHD. She does not like ballet. She doesn't want to get involved, right? But she likes other forms of dance, jazz and lyrical and so forth. So if you can find that piece that's bringing you joy, that's making you happy, then that's the best one. Now, when we talk about exercise and exercise physiology, things that start to get up your heart rate, start to increase what's called cardiopulmonary fitness or your VO2 max, those things are important as well because it's helping the physiology. Things like heart rate variability, for example, allowing that flexibility between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Well, one thing I'd like to note is that, it's not that we need both sympathetic and parasympathetic activation. It's the flexibility between the two things that we're training here. So, sometimes you just, and we all know it's like, oh, I feel depressed. I don't want to move. You're in parasympathetic overdrive. Then you need some sympathetic to get out of bed. But sometimes you're too stressed, you're too sympathetic, and then you need the parasympathetic. So you can really use these movement practices to help regulate wherever you are. If you need more drive, then do something really powered up that's going to get the heartbeat up, maybe Zumba. There's tons of Zumba things online. I love a Zumba class. But if you are too high wired, like you had a stressful day, you need to calm down, well, maybe let's do some yoga. Let's meditate. Let's do our breathing. So you really kind of need to sense where you are, what you need, and then tailor it for those purposes.
Got it. Thank you. Many caregivers are asking about teenagers and quote reluctant adolescents. So, and I do want to say that a quarter of our survey respondents here talked about a feeling of embarrassment or awkwardness or self-consciousness being something that is a barrier to them trying these kinds of activities. So do you have any advice, specifically for parents or caregivers of teenagers who are not that difficult to persuade sometimes and are very self-conscious, and also for the adults about how to overcome that hurdle so they can access these benefits?
Yeah. I know because teaching at the college level, I see that as well. And so I'm constantly trying to figure out like, okay, how can we get out of that social brain, especially in adolescence where, there's embarrassment and, oh, if I do the wrong thing. So sometimes improvisation tends to be, even though it's like my favorite place to go, but it tends to be an embarrassing space for people. What am I supposed to do? So things maybe that have more set choreography, that where they can follow along. Again, like Zumba comes into play here because it's fun, it's directed. Even like a yoga class where there are very particular shapes that are intentional that you're supposed to do and things like that. So anywhere where you can follow along. If improvisation is of interest, sometimes I'll do things where we take vision out of play. So we do something closed eyes, where we can do small movements or gestural movements, but vision doesn't come into play. If certainly like as a very social, adolescence is a very social time. So if there's something, they could find a friend to do a class with, for example, and go in there together and feel a little bit supported, that might be another way to help as well.
Those are great suggestions. Thank you. Some participants are asking about how long do you have to dance for? What is the duration and what is the intensity that's needed? And
Yeah.
do you have any sense of how long these benefits last?
Great questions. Yeah. So of course, I showed that, the effects can come on board within a 60-minute within one single session. Probably, of course, those studies on how long the effects last, they're still underway. And when you want, in terms of getting a habitual physical activity practice, it's definitely recommended that you stick with something for about 3 to 4 months until it becomes a habit. And people have to remember too that and we have studies showing that the more you exercise, the more motivated to exercise you're going to be. So you really need to get it on board as a habit, and then you kind of come to crave it. Oh, I want to do that. And we also have research showing that during sleep, the brain is actually having particular neural oscillations that are predictive of your exercise behavior in the future. So the brain comes to know, oh, it's going to get a physical activity boost. But yes, it does take some time. I'm going to say 3 to 4 months to get that habit on board. And when we're talking about how many times a week, definitely, again, recommending that 3 to 4 week dosage, or 3 to 4 times a week dosage. And, but again, these little spurts of if you have 5-10 minutes where that's all you can have for physical movement and kind of make it a daily practice, then that's an excellent way as well. Wherever you can work it into your schedule is better than doing it not at all. And the more you do it, the more robust those effects are going to be.
Okay. So we have a few questions about different ways that dance or movement can be used to help with specific hurdles. So one participant writes in and it says, my daughter's struggles with OCD are so significant that she can't go through the motions of leaving the house for school, but my daughter has been a dancer for 11 years. She's actually a high-level competitive dancer now. And though she experiences the same kind of distress to go to dance, she is able to move through that to go to dance. It is the only tool that my daughter has to regulate herself. So this caregiver is wondering, can dancing facilitate one's ability to comply with treatment for OCD or anxiety or ADHD? How can she leverage that kind of benefit in a more global way to help her child with treatment? And other caregivers have asked if it can be used to help, this is a separate but related question, tough periods of the day, like difficult transitions.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a good question. Does the benefits of dance translate to other real world things? It's something I'm very curious about too. But when we think about exercise, and we have a lot of work studying kind of the acute effects of exercise, it does tap into this executive function. And when you're talking about executive function, it's all about the prefrontal cortex, which is right underneath our forehead here. It's one of our most evolutionary, it is our most evolutionarily advanced part of the brain. It deals with personality, future thinking, planning, attention. So physical activity stimulates this brain region most prominently. And you have, again, dopamine and serotonin, all these neurotransmitters going there. So yes, theoretically, I don't think this kind of work has been done, but theoretically, it should. It should help with all of those tasks that, like what I always recommend, because of our studies kind of focused on executive function, that instead of doing that extra studying, just go for a run. Do an exercise session before your workout, because it's going to improve your short-term memory. It's going to improve your attentional ability and focus. It's going to improve your processing speed. It's going to decrease your stress, right? All these things that you need for all other things, of real world things. So yes, I think the answer is yes, but the studies need to be done for sure.
Okay. And in terms of, you talked a little bit about this already, but a lot of our participants are trying to find ways to integrate this into their routine. And so you had already given some wonderful examples of that. But if there's any other ideas or examples of ways that either adults can integrate this into their work day as a habitual thing, or parents can integrate it into the daily routine of their children so that it becomes, just part of what happens on a daily basis. People are interested in that.
Yeah. So, of course, it's so tricky to find the time in our busy lives. But, if there's things that you put on your calendar, like, okay, I'm going to use my lunch period to go for a walk instead, and then I'll have lunch at my desk later. If you can find those moments when, you have some downtime and utilize it. I mean, we're a completely sedentary society, it's like a sedentary behaviors. It's a public health issue. So I know we are watching television and scrolling on our phones, right? There's a lot of time we could use for physical movement. So it's really about finding the motivation to do it. And as I said, like, I love this trick. It's like, okay, if you have a favorite show, if you have a favorite podcast or some music, get it on, put it on, get your sneakers on, and then go for a walk, because then your walk will be partnered with, or your dance or your yoga, whatever it might be, it'll be partnered with that thing you really love. And so then you'll crave both of those things, and it's kind of a double benefit. So yeah, it's really about finding the motivation, and then you'll kind of naturally find the time. Or if, families can kind of come together in the morning or after school and have like a little dedicated movement session. But yeah, I know it feels like it needs to be really intentional, because it's hard to find the time.
Yes, but those are all such great ideas. And I have a friend here in New York who swears by her dance walk every week. She's organized a dance walk in the park where her and several friends get together, and they half walk and half dance, and they listen to music, and that accountability,
right,
and the social reward of being together gets them to do over the hump of self-consciousness. And yeah, it's finding those little tricks and things that will appeal to you specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So a teacher asks, how can they use these movement or dance breaks but still allow for a return to a task after a relatively short time? And how can these breaks not disrupt neurotypical learners in the same class? So do you have any tips about how to use this in a classroom in a way that will allow for a smooth transition after the movement concludes?
Yeah, because I think that's a really good point, because right, you're getting everybody up and kind of riled up, and then how do you calm them down? So if you can end the movement practice with like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes of breath work, I think that's an excellent way, right? Because you're getting them back into that parasympathetic. They've engaged the sympathetic a little bit. Their prefrontal cortex has been activated, right? They're ready for some academic tasks, but you need to get them regulated again. So that's what I would recommend is some deep breathing, getting them sitting down again. Just even like right hand on the heart, left hand on the belly, breathe in, and have everybody do that together, because I think that could help.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Basso, that has to be our last question, but thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wonderful expertise with our community.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to today's listeners as well. If you'd like to access the event resources, you can visit ADDitudeMag.com and search podcast 586. The slides and recording are posted a few hours after each live webinar. And if you're listening in replay mode, simply click on the episode description. Please know that our full library of ADDitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts podcast, and it's available on most streaming platforms. We hope to see you again next Thursday for our webinar with Dr. Sharon Celine. It's called Don't Tell Me What to Do, Pathological Demand Avoidance in Neurodivergent Kids. After the week of Thanksgiving on December 2nd, please join us for Heart Health and ADHD Treatment, Implications of Stimulant Use for Adults with Dr. Samuel Cortese. Make sure you don't miss future ADDitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at additudemag.com/newsletters. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.